Do so with humility, for as any surfer or 4chan frequenter will advise you, forces of nature cannot be tamed. I believe that's where we left off last video. But this does not mean that they should be condemned. Snarled features mouth a lack of control and fear of vulnerability as technology ferries the rest of us into an open-sourced future. Ride that wave to create the revolution of tomorrow. Democracy has failed because so many people fear it. They believe that wealth and happiness are so limited that a world full of intelligent, healthy, and free people is impossible, if not undesirable. Such a world, with all of its contradictions, can be saved, can yet be born again, but not out of capital, interest, property, or gold. W.E.B. Du Bois, 1868 to 1963, American academic, journalist, historian, author, and activist. Revolting Spring. Have you noticed that the democratic anarchy of the internet seems to be invading the outranet? Throughout 2011, both the Middle East and North Africa have been a cauldron of populist action. It's too early to tell whether true populism will prevail or countries will be divided and conquered on behalf of private interest. For example, the Libyan rebels are perhaps the first revolutionaries in history to, while still fighting, both privatize their country's oil reserves and establish a central bank. A century earlier, Iran was partitioned by outside powers after its own constitutional revolution. A predecessor to British Petroleum, BP, went on to drill what then was the first oil well in the Middle East. Interesting note, Winston Churchill at the time served as a lobbyist for this company. Current reports quote BP as looking forward to resuming their operations in Libya when conditions allow. They have already returned to Iraq, some say gaining a stranglehold over its vast oil fields. Suffice it to say that the people gaining power in these populist struggles might not have the purest of intentions. Revolution, although often started by the people, doesn't always guarantee power to the people. But the techniques of today's civil resistance have nonetheless been inspiring. Youth-led and technology-driven, real populism has been mobilized across the world. In the section, Chess, Not Checkers, we will discuss the more complicated goal of how to win revolutionary war and not just the opening battles. But as battles go, 2011 was a year for historic openings. Tunisia, Algeria, Lebanon, Jordan, the protests spread like wildfire. Mauritania, Sudan, Oman, Saudi Arabia, democratic fever ran rampant. Egypt, Yemen, Iraq, Bahrain, prime ministers ousted, political police dissolved, state of emergencies lifted, wages increased, females gaining suffrage. Libya, Kuwait, Morocco, Western Sahara, Syria. Even Israelis joined in on the protest action. But what started it all? Who took the first stand in Tunisia when food prices were rising and unemployment was spreading desperation? Who spoke out in a country without the freedom of speech or other political outlets? Mohamed Bouazizi. One man, set himself on fire in a protest act known as self-immolation. Revolution is serious business. Do you think that the banker or a politician would set himself on fire for the sake of his privilege? Would Barack Obama put a kerosene suit on the next time he snuck a smoke if he didn't win re-election? For all the travesty of history, all the bad things that have happened to good people, all of the assassinations and genocides, take comfort in knowing that when you fight for revolution, you fight on the side that has a monopoly on sincerity. Which is why the title of this chapter is so important. Why revolt? Ask yourself this time and time again. You don't have to come up with an answer worth flaming for, but at least bring enough conviction to honor those who felt they had no other choice. Another person of history, Hiraoka Kimitaki, also martyred himself for revolution. A man of incredible physical fitness and talent, a warrior poet who was both a martial artist and an accomplished writer. Hiraoka created his own private army called the Shield Society. In 1970, they invaded the headquarters of Japan's Eastern Ground Self-Defense Force. Perched on a roof, he pleaded for the soldiers to return to Japan's honorable tradition of the samurai. They laughed at him. Hiraoka promptly withdrew and committed seppuku. The lesson: passion can fuel a revolution, but passion alone cannot create social change. The beauty of these modern protests lie in people acting on emotion first, hurdling institutional barriers faster than they can be set up. Impulsive action is an organic tactical advantage over entrenched bureaucracy, but the revolutionary should be grounded in a mature understanding of the world. Why is modern society the way it is? Who had a hand in its creation? Who are the beneficiaries? Who are the losers? Where are the battles being fought, and how can they be won? These are the questions that you should be concerned with. Theirs are the answers that demand revolution. Viva la résistance! Nous ne sommes plus vos Cagr. We are no longer your monkeys. With this declaration, Patrice Emery Lumumba, Congo's first elected prime minister, ended his inaugural Independence Day speech. It was June 30th, 1960, 2 days before his 35th birthday. Within 10 weeks, the Republic of the Congo would suffer a coup, and by early the next year, Patrice would be killed, executed by firing squad, cut up by hacksaw, and dissolved in sulfuric acid. Belgian King Baudouin no doubt felt uncomfortable sharing the stage with Patrice. Baudouin had just given a speech of his own, in which he had lectured the newly independent country not to compromise the future with hasty reforms. Almost a century earlier, Baudouin, great-granduncle, King Leopold II of Belgium, had created the International Association for the Exploration and Civilization of Central Africa. Leopold's Congo became such a grotesque tragedy that it inspired the world's first large-scale human rights movement. But by the Berlin Conference of 1884, the African pie had already been divided among the empires of Europe. Now impetuous young men of the 20th century, men like Patrice Lumumba, were daring to question these portions. Malcolm X once said that there has never been a bloodless revolution. More important for you to consider is whether there's ever been an empire without blood on its hands. As a revolutionary, don't let your critics shift the stigma of violence onto your shoulders. Revolution is not brutal. It is the history behind these geopolitical lines in the global sandbox that is sickening. This is the reality that people all over the world experience. The very foundation of our modern civilization is faulted. All that was left of a man that Malcolm once called the greatest black man who ever walked the African continent were a few teeth and bone fragments. These are the cruel fragments of history. Where is the justice? It is this ugly bedrock that is now fissuring with populist tremors. Resistance to empire is resistance to inhumanity. Revolution can only sound extreme to those who aren't familiar with the rotten underbelly of Western civilization. Long before the Belgian government finally apologized in 2002 for its role in Patrice's murder, and before the CIA documents implicated the agency in the crime, Malcolm X and others suspected the truth. Che Guevara warned his fellow revolutionaries that Lumumba's murder should be a lesson for all of us. To paraphrase Che's buddy Fidel, history has a habit of vindicating the righteous. No, we can't fight the battles of the entire world. As Americans, it is our moral obligation to untie our own patriotic knots. It just so happens that in doing so, we will achieve the greatest good. When we dismantle the American empire, we will shut down the most efficient killing machine in the history of civilization. Don't worry about having a global perspective. The new American Revolution will be the world revolution because our actions here in the most powerful nation in the world have global gravity, for better or for worse. In 1960, America's covert state paramilitary flew a master chemist packed with poison syringes into the Congo. This macabre assassination plot was eventually abandoned, but the invisible hand of the CIA continues to strangle populist uprisings the world over. Being a part of the resistance means you're going to have to uncover real history. A historical struggle against empire has transpired, is still transpiring. Your country does have blood on its hands. Things are going to get heavy. Which is why before we go any further, let's make sure that your heart is in the right place. As they say in the military, time to check your intestinal fortitude. Revolution is no place for a weak stomach or other internal organs. When they start to wear your clothes, do their dreams become more like yours? Who do they look like? When they start to use your language, do they say what you say? Who are they in your words? When they start to use your money, do they need the same things you need? Or do the things change? When they are converted to your gods, do you know who they are praying to? Do you know who is praying for you not to be there? W.S. Merwin, born 1927, American poet laureate, Pulitzer Prize winner, and pacifist. Love is the answer. Back when I was in the Army, I bought a guitar and started teaching myself how to play. One afternoon, my bunkmate claimed that my guitar was out of tune. I countered that the 5 frets all sound in sync. He replied, "Yeah, it might be in tune to itself, but it's still out of key. Regarding morality, we are born with perfect pitch into a society tuned to itself. This is why American history is a trail of broken strings. Our country's self-deception is the height of intellectual, tone-deaf sophistication. State violence uses a multitude of excuses to justify its actions. The messy remainders to their moral calculus disappear in euphemisms like collateral damage or outright lies such as hero. Can you identify the heroism in dying for another man's deception? Who is born without empathy? Who offers you an excuse to objectify your fellow man? Which excuses have been used to justify more carnage, racism or nationalism? Was the former born of the necessity of the latter? Malcolm X figured as much when he told a reporter that, as far as Uncle Sam rallied Americans to first hate and then forgive the Hun and the Jap, he could propagandize racial peace at the turn of a broadcast. Malcolm pointed out that racism is an effective political tool. It wasn't in the interest of those in power to promote racial peace. The broadcast of power is tuned always to profitability, not peace. On November 21st, 1945, during the opening address before the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, United States Chief of Counsel Robert H. Jackson read a report tabulating Jews slaughtered by the Nazis. In Zhytomyr, 3,145 Jews had to be shot because, judging from experience, they had to be considered as carriers of Bolshevik propaganda. In his memoir, Body Count, U.S. Army officer and convicted American war criminal William Calley said that he and his troops weren't in Vietnam to kill human beings, but to kill an ideology that is carried by, I don't know, pawns, blobs, pieces of flesh. I was there to destroy an intangible idea. Where is the International Military Tribunal for the Vietnamese? Where is their Holocaust memorial? Do the architects of that genocide, those who currently enjoy their lives as free men, feel any remorse? The CIA alone executed at least 20,000 civilians. What right did they have to create hell on earth? How many know that the British press likened the environmental damage during America's pacification of Fallujah in Iraq to that of Hiroshima? You can find the twisted babies with tumorous heads for yourself on the internet, cradled in the arms of weeping, broken Iraqi mothers. Anti-Semitism is no longer socially acceptable, at least among the educated classes. Unfortunately, no such social sanctions exist for anti-communism, anti-Arabism, or any other stigma the powerful create for the next identifiable class, people who are unfortunate enough to be standing between greed and increased wealth. Novelist Ayn Rand, intentioned or not, was a brilliant excuse maker. For those who lusted for Middle East oil, the Arabs are one of the least developed cultures, mere primitives and savages. And while before West Point cadets in 1974, any white person who brings the element of civilization has the right to conquest. These are tough subjects to broach under a heading of love. But love is the only solution to inhumanity on this scale. To drown out your natural empathic pitch, deception needs to make a loud enough noise. It is tasked with changing the other man into merely the other, to be discarded like that tree or that animal or any other object that is defined based on its utility rather than its inherent value. Lumber, meat, collateral damage, an object that you can then take advantage of or ignore. When my cousin drove his butter bar through the streets of Iraq, he was told not to stop, no matter what was in the road, dog or child. 100% mental disability. The dignity and inherent rights of man. These are the universal truths which the masters of war must ignore. The playwright and Nobel laureate Harold Pinter asked us from his wheelchair in haggard gasp to come and see the blood in the streets. President Barack Obama, in contrast, used the same Nobel platform a couple years later to lecture the world on just war theory. You can't counter this degree of sophism with argument. As Martin Luther King Jr. proclaimed, you must simply choose love, not emotional bosh, but a strong demanding love, because hate is too great of a burden to bear. The historical cycle of violence has been acknowledged by many, but perhaps by none as succinctly as English poet W.H. Auden, who pointed out that I and the public know what all school children learn, that those to whom evil is done do evil in return. Revolution. There's 3 versions. Number 1, number 2, and number 9. Number 2 is a single because the other boys didn't like number 1. They said it wasn't fast enough. So I made it fast. And sometimes I said, count me in, count me out. The thing I regret was making a reference to Chairman Mao, which might spoil any chances I have of going to visit China. But I wrote the Chairman Mao line in the studio because I didn't have any words. What I was trying to say to the Maoists or anybody that wanted to change the world, why go stand in front of a policeman with a red communist flag in your hand and a big suit and all that, and then get hit? I thought it was unsubtle. So in the song, I wasn't putting down revolution. But if you really want to change the thing, do it subtly in a way that the establishment can't attack, that the establishment don't understand. Therefore, they can't kill it. John Lennon, 1940 to 1980, British singer, songwriter, pacifist, and revolutionary. This is why Che himself said that the true revolutionary is guided by a great feeling of love. You don't have time or energy for self-destruction nor endless debate. Love is its own reason and its own reward. You can't afford to risk becoming that which you are fighting. The enemy is the objectification of man, as manifested through violent institutions and defended by cowards. Your task then is to, as another junior, Kurt Vonnegut, put it, place man at the center of the universe, whether he belongs there or not. If you don't, you run the risk that someone, something, or some institution will come along and create an excuse to once again abuse your brother. Don't commit the same error modern society has by abstracting man out of the picture. Maintain love as your highest value and preserve the dignity of your fellow man. This truth has been ringing in your ears since you were born. Utilize it to make sure your revolution stays not just in tune with itself, but in key with your heart. Organize, organize, organize. Have you ever found yourself caught up in a strange conversation with an interesting person, not sure how you got there, If so, congratulations! You've been practicing for the revolution. If you're going to change the world, you're going to have to change people. And yes, that means you're going to have to talk to them. A couple years ago, I stayed the night in a beautiful hostel nestled into the redwood coast of Northern California. You could see the waves crashing along the shoreline from the dorm-style rooms. Beautiful place. The first night I was there, I got into it with a guy I'll call Glock user from part of the email contact he later wrote down for me. At first, I had actually avoided Mr. Glock user. Sitting on a couch in the cozy communal living room, I chose instead to chat up a vacationing elementary school teacher. She was saying something vaguely positive about Barack Obama, and I was trying to, politely if I remember correctly, disabuse her of the belief that an establishment politician would ever bring any meaningful change to America. That's when Glock user started sniping. He, evidently, was not an Obama supporter either. A Vietnam vet and rugged outdoorsman, I could tell he had been looking for an outlet to vent. Hold on, I waved at the school teacher with usual modesty. I'm sure that you're wrong, but this guy's interesting. And I started tearing into the Glock user. We let each other have it with both barrels. At one point, he questioned my patriotism, daring me to admit that I didn't support the troops in Iraq. They're victims, I countered without missing a beat. They're being taken advantage of, nothing more. People like me are the only ones trying to help them by telling the truth and going after the war criminals. But no, I won't defend their actions. Glock user then went into how modern terrorism is like an all-permeating fog, motioning with his hands close to the floor. So I went into a description of clinical paranoia, motioning with my hands close to my ears. Silly story, but it's the reality of organizing. You speak to people. You have discussions that lead nowhere. You build relationships. In the last section of this book, we'll go over communication styles and how to minimize having your words fall on deaf ears. But the Cliff's Notes version is simple. Learn from others. Actively try to discern where the other person is coming from. You don't have to pull any punches. Just be willing to take as well as you give. In order to do this, you must divorce your identity from your politics. I know this sounds like contradictory advice, but the identity of a true revolutionary is the revolution, not his own beliefs. Individually, human beings are frail. It is when we act collectively that we release our fullest potential as miracles of creation, a brotherhood of man. Harvey Milk, the faded genius populist from 70s era San Francisco, didn't stand up before every crowd and say, "I'm Harvey Milk, and I like the penis." He said, "I'm Harvey Milk, and I want to recruit you." If you are fighting for the people, you can't afford egoism. Your first job is, and always will be, recruitment. In the end, I don't know if Glock user agreed with anything I had to say, but we had fun talking, while in the process clearing everyone out of that poor living room. I like to think I earned his respect. As a parting shot, he offered me some advice, which I will pass on to you. Yes, America needs a change. It's like a mighty ship sailing into the ocean. Just don't be the asshole who tries to make a U-turn. Nudge her gently, and she'll get back on course. Just nudge her gently. Revolution doesn't have to be the U-turn. It can be the nudge. It can be whatever the people want it to be. Revolution is the people because it won't come without their support. The revolution will be won or lost on the battleground of recruitment. You need not only your own ideas, but the wisdom of both the school teacher and the Glock user. You need them to make this their revolution. So before hitting the streets and signing people up, it seems like the right time to briefly discuss the loaded R word we've been throwing around. But I don't own an AK-47. Revolution. Revolution. Noun. 1. A forcible overthrow of a government or social order in favor of a new system. See uprising. 2. A dramatic and wide-reaching change in the way something works or is organized or in people's idea about it. Common sense, especially in light of the previous section on love, dictates that we choose the latter definition. So you can leave the AKs, berets, and bombs at home. The revolution will address how America works, is organized, and is thought about. There's too much to be done for you to waste your time playing commando. In the same way that people today might associate the word revolution with violent extremism, revolutionary activists are often remembered for their most incendiary acts. To paraphrase one Woody Allen, you can build 1,000 bridges, but blow up one person and you're not a bridge builder. You're a terrorist. Go figure. Real revolution is about politics, not flashy action. Bobby Seale said it best when he urged that politics starts with a hungry stomach. And that's coming from a guy who advocated using firearms to monitor your local police. It is no coincidence that the Black Panthers' most successful program was their school breakfast initiative, just making sure that poor inner-city youths didn't start the day hungry. A simple but revolutionary act. By putting the Bible's Matthew 25:40 into practice, doing for one of the least of these brothers of mine, the Black Panthers did for the revolution. People are going to remember you for what you do, not what you destroy. Don't give them an excuse to ignore you. Violence is an act of desperation from a person ungrounded morally and mentally. I am not disregarding the very real need for self-defense, which we will get into later. But when you hold all of the advantages, you shouldn't begin strategizing from your heels. You have the numbers on your side. You own the moral high ground. You can lay claim to the trajectory of history, the struggle of mankind to control his own destiny. It is not a matter of if there's a revolution, only when. Look around you. You'll realize that time is now. The way something works, is organized, and is thought about. Sounds like a pretty good checklist to me. Now, on to the masses. Technical difficulties. Consumers versus citizens. If we're going to address the common man, we're going to have to tackle his most debilitating sickness, affluenza. That's right, mass consumption. The simplest way to encourage revolution is to expose the history of how America has replaced its citizens with consumers. Most people don't know that modern consumerism is a fabricated ideology created shortly after World War I. Apple pie, the American dream, the two-car garage, and propaganda in every advertisement. Many reasons to a revolt include pollution, corporate greed, war, and poverty that can be traced back to this feat of social engineering. Consumerism didn't invent social justice, but it definitely turned social predation into a science. And economic belief systems are there to pick up the slack where logic eventually has to fail. So what exactly was the cost of trading our politics for purchasing power? A whole slew of anti-democratic initiatives were pushed through during the first part of the 20th century. The control of America's monetary system was once again privatized. The congressional representation was capped at 435 delegates. The military-industrial complex was institutionalized by 2 world wars. Wall Street lawyers recruited Nazis to help create a covert state paramilitary system. But of all these events, consumerism was the most devastating. Through one ad campaign, the corporatists were able to cement their position as both the base of increasingly efficient production and the beneficiaries of increasingly frivolous consumption. They created a beautiful cycle in which one man could chase his tail forever. Increase productivity to increase production, to increase consumption, to work harder to pay for it all. Increasing productivity. It is a closed loop that denied all but its own internal logic, approaching an oxymoronic artificial intelligence that reinforces itself. It is a hamster wheel in which you can't slow down, let alone stop, without getting run over. A wheel that requires more and more hamsters. We are more efficient than ever before at making more stuff than we ever could buy, and yet life keeps getting harder. In order to swallow the poison pills of austerity measures, older retirements, longer hours, and lower wages, you would have to deny the simple logic of progress. People tend to get better at doing things, don't they? And as a result, things should get better, no? The benefits that one would expect from mankind's natural innovation are being drained. First, by the masters of a debt-based economic system, the bankers. Next, by the managerial class, the technocrats. And finally, by the workers' own cannibalism through the force-fed mantra of conspicuous consumption. Since as recent as WW2, labor productivity has more than doubled. Why aren't we working half as much then, or 3/4 as much even? Where has this efficiency dividend gone? The way of the supposed peace dividend after the fall of the Soviet Union. It was absorbed into a rapacious system that cannot be satiated, run by men who will never be able to quench their greed. In other words, this public treasure and treasury, but we'll get into that later, has been purposefully stolen from the commons. The truth is as plain as day for all to see, while consumerism is a story they sell you to keep the cycle spinning. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as smoothly functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. Propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. Edward Bernays, 1891 to 1995, American propagandist and public relations innovator. Technical difficulties. Give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. Lease that man a fishing pole, sell him the bait, secure the property rights, demand an equity position. Man but what enterprise? To add insult to injury, the devil's gift of consumerism replaces old-fashioned civics, which used to be at the heart of American life. Cities are now planned around strip malls and big box Chinese retailers, not town squares. People have less leisure time for their own family interests, let alone their civic duty as American citizens. For the first time in history, people are working harder than previous generations for less pay, and this perhaps may be the crucial mistake of the rich elite. They've taken too much out of their spin cycle and pushed people too far. In doing so, they've done most of your revolutionary work for you. Creating an army of unemployed, they've given people the time and reasons to revolt. Making spectacles of their greed, they painted targets on their back. The discontent their system naturally creates has outpaced their ability to obscure it. Despite the general ignorance of the American public of their own history, the international violence of their covert state paramilitary, the aggressive class warfare tactics of their rich, the private control of America's money supply, despite these narratives being absent from the cultural mainstream, Americans are still out in the streets protesting. Hunter S. Thompson once exclaimed that, "In a world of thieves, the only final sin is stupidity." These masters of men, whom President Herbert Hoover praised as having taken over the job of creating desire and transformed people into constantly moving happiness machines, have acted like imbeciles. In doing so, they've lost control of their happy little machines. These robots are revolting. Your job now is to remind the public that they aren't, as Charlie Chaplin described, machine men with machine hearts. They are the straw for the fires of revolution that will clear the way for real democracy. The master's house is going up in flames, and our affluenza fever is about to be sweated out. To paraphrase a certain corporatist snow princess, burn, baby, burn. $100 million Americans support you. But before the call for revolution goes out, let's lay down some numbers. What is your recruitment goal? How many people do you think are on your side? To begin with, you can claim 100 million supporters just by doing nothing. Remember the swollen ranks of the apathetic? We've just turned them into a classified constituency. Thank you for welcoming me and my lazy friends to your revolution. Of course, I'm still going to stand on the sidelines and wait for something to inspire me to act. But at least you know that myself and the rest of the third of the voting population that regularly avoids the polls on election day is not going to oppose you, which is a start. A person who made up their mind not to follow your enemy is halfway to where you need them to be. Look at that. Your job's already half done. Now to work on the other half and to start the war of attrition against the loyal opposition. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Dissecting the political spectrum is the subject of our next chapter. Let's look at historical models of apathy first. The cool kids of history who turned their backs on the state before it was even offered them the choice of suffrage. That's right, I'm talking about our dear friends, the pirates of the high seas. Similarly criticized for not participating in the institutions of their day, pirates wrote their own rules. In creating their own alternatives to the dominant culture, they pioneered many aspects of modern democracy. Unfortunately, their general illiteracy denies them a voice in the historical record proportionate to their innovations. From what evidence does exist, we know that they developed pirate checks and balances that allowed them to have a captain who wielded authority during fighting and a quartermaster who was elected for non-battle issues. They had constitutions, injury compensation, and the right of secession. And most interesting, in a world of bigotry, runaway slaves were welcomed and considered equal to other soldiers. This is no small feat. Technical difficulties. This is no small feat. Surrounded by predatory, ugly role models, pirates were able to carve for themselves a small space for sanity, even if it was sequestered to the high seas and punishable by death. I don't mean to make light of the real atrocities of these profiteers. Sure, Roberto Cofresi, Puerto Rico's early 19th century Robin Hood, took from the rich traders and gave to his island's poor. He also had a habit of nailing captives alive to the deck of his ship. But compare actions like these to the world in which they lived. For all their faults, pirates were some of the most decent men of their age. Spiritual philosopher and adamant independent Jiddu Krishnamurti once warned that it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. The rebels of society are often our canaries in the mine shaft, their rebellion alerting us to dangers we might not be sensitive enough to perceive. Ever candid American novelist Mark Twain pointed out that there never was a revolution unless there were some oppressive and intolerable conditions against which to revolt. Instead of writing off the social outcasts like so many others, make them your first recruits. They knew probably before you did why one should revolt against modern society, or at least they felt it. The reasons for revolution suffocate us to the point that some people are born grasping. The reasons for revolution suffocate us to the point that some people are born gasping. Seek these uncomfortable people out, the non-participatory, the non-conformists, the counterculture, the freaks and geeks, the weirdos. In responding to an inquiry about drug use, John Lennon once turned the question on its head. Why do we have these accessories to normal living? John Lennon once turned the question on its head. Why do we have to have these accessories to normal living? To live? I mean, is there something wrong with society that's making us so pressurized that we cannot live in it without guarding ourselves against it? Bullseye, John. Your natural insight might have been one of the reasons they had to vote you off of the island early. Revolutionaries wanted. Don't ever lose sight of the fact that the world needs revolutionaries so it can cleanse itself of oppressive systems. Corrupt governments need overthrowing. Oppressed people need liberating. Criminals deserve to be brought to justice, and civilization requires an accurate historic record, no matter what those in power might tell you. Don't be intimidated or discouraged by those who might call revolution unreasonable. As Irish playwright, journalist, economist, and the only person to receive both a Nobel Prize and an Oscar, George Bernard Shaw was exceptionally prolific. He was also an idealist, believing that all progress depends on the unreasonable man, who, rather than capitulating, adapts surrounding conditions to himself. Why revolt? Because you can change the world. Put the guns into our hands and we will use them. Give us the slogans and we will turn them into reality. Sing the battle hymns and we will take them up where you left off. Not one, not 10, not 10,000, not a million, not 10 millions, not 100 millions, but 1 billion, 2 billions, all of the people of the world. We have the slogans, and we will have the hymns, and we will have the guns, and we will use them, and we will live. Make no mistake it, we will live. We will be alive, and we will walk and talk and eat and sing and laugh and feel and love and bear our children in tranquility and security, in decency, in peace. You plan the wars, you masters of men, plan the wars and point the way, and we will point the gun. Dalton Trumbo, 1905 to 1976, American novelist and Academy Award-winning screenwriter. 50 years after the last Gracchi brothers was murdered, reform again stormed the Roman scene, or perhaps vengeance is a better term. Spartacus, the Thracian soldier turned gladiator turned rebel, started his revolt with a mere 70 men. After a quick succession of victories, his ranks swelled to an army of 70,000. More amazing, he wasn't just recruiting the slaves he freed, but the herdsmen and shepherds as well. Rome had committed the same stupidity sin that Hunter S. Thompson warned about. It was caught off guard. Eventually, it would take the wealthiest man in the Senate leading 8 legions of professional Roman soldiers, as well as divisions within Spartacus' own ranks, and his betrayal by pirates to put down the uprising. Spartacus' body was never found. You never know who's going to heed the call for revolution until you put it out. The military likes to talk about how many boots on the ground a given imperial campaign will require. As a revolutionary, you need troops as well, people to act out your aims, whether it's an overhaul of the political, economic, or cultural systems you've identified as oppressive. Remember your checklist. The way something works is organized and is thought about. You need to start thinking about how many feet on the street it will take to achieve real change in America. 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, more. A WW2 POW himself, Kurt Vonnegut Jr., once commented that the triumph of anything is a matter of organization. If there is such things as angels, I hope that they are organized along the lines of the mafia. By no means do you want to replicate the systems you're trying to transform. But if you don't at least attempt to match their organizational sophistication, then you're history. And not in a good way. Like so many other movements, you will be outmaneuvered, co-opted, and or destroyed. The goal isn't, as so many activists capitulate, to gain enough attention that your platform is incorporated into the political spectrum. Imagine the kind of world we live in where activists didn't just punt but went all the way, if they didn't just adapt but transform the systems they rallied against. This type of boldness is how your revolution will recruit not only the slaves, but the herdsmen and shepherds as well. This is how you will create a Spartacus-sized, Spartacus-strong rebellion. This is the mind state you will need to bring to the revolution. Be uncompromising in your demand for justice, unwavering in your focus, and watch the ranks of your movement grow. The public has been waiting for something, anything, to come along that they can believe in. Don't subscribe to the nihilism of a final junior, George W. Bush, who, when asked how history will judge his actions, replied, "History? We don't know. We'll all be dead." Don't just read history. Be history. Be that something that suffering people the world over have been waiting for. Be the revolution you want to see in the world. Be a realist. Demand the impossible. Beloved children's author Roald Dahl believed that nothing compares to pure imagination. Want to change the world? There's nothing to it. Now our goal over the next 24 chapters is to make sure you have the wisdom to change it for the better. Junkie. That's the politics, baby. I'm sick, Pops. Can you help me? My mind's thinking about shit I don't want to think about. I can't stop the motherfucker, baby. Moving too fast for the kid. Tell me some of those old lies of yours. Make me stop thinking about the truth. Will you help me? Wino. Yeah, I'm going to help you, boy. Because I believe you got potential. That's right. You don't know how to deal with the white man. That's your problem. I know how to deal with him. That's right. That's why I'm in the position I'm in today. Junkie. I know I ain't going to heaven. Shit. I'm just going. That's right. I'm just doing it over time. If I come back, I hope you motherfuckers are this shit right. Because you done fucked it up this time. You wasn't sensitive, you motherfuckers. You run over people. You put them in a position where they can't do a thing in it. And then when they can't, you say, well, that wasn't... You all say, see? Well, that wasn't right. That wasn't right. That's the same. It ain't right. I know it ain't right, and I tell motherfucker about it, and they tell me I'm crazy. I know this shit is foul, with a capital foul. I wish you the best. Richard Pryor, 1940 to 2005. American stand-up comedian, actor, writer, and social critic. to be continued.